Welcome to Top Advisor Marketing, where you will learn how to become a prolific online influencer, attract more ideal clients, and grow your practice. Brought to you by Top Advisor Podcasting, a done-for-you podcasting solution built just for trusted advisors. And now, your co-hosts of Top Advisor Marketing, Kirk Lowe and Matt Halloran.
Hello and welcome to another Top Advisor Marketing podcast. I love it when people give me referrals to new people. It gives me an opportunity to learn from them. It gives me an opportunity to be horrifically selfish and sit in my own little room here and pick the brains of somebody who is way smarter than I am, which of course is the majority of the population. And our guest today is going to talk about something we've never, ever talked about on this podcast. And Liz is going to tell us a little bit about some statistics that are wildly eye-opening. But our guest is Liz Travis Allen. She's an attorney, she's a speaker, and she's a disability activist, right? And we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about the business applications of her knowledge about being a disability advocate and a specialist and an activist. But we're also going to talk about a huge market that very, very few of you are paying any attention to at all. And when Liz goes through these numbers, you're going to be, your eyes are just going to be wide open. So Liz, thank you for being on the show and welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Matt. Glad to be here.
Let's begin by finding out a little bit about how you became who you are today. So tell us your history.
Sure. So interestingly, my story starts back in 2003, where I went from a two-sport Division I athlete at an Ivy League school to bedbound, living with my parents, my mother spoon-feeding me soup. The best way I can describe what happened is that due to multiple bacterial and viral infections, my immune system essentially broke in a way that science doesn't understand. I got bit by a tick, picked up Lyme disease and a couple other tick-borne illnesses, and essentially my health just tanked. I was crawling up my stairs in my dorm room before I ended up at home. My heart was beating so loud in my ears I couldn't hear what people were saying. I was having crazy drenching night sweats and intense pain, really incredible brain fog, so I couldn't listen to music or understand TV. And I actually spent about 4 years in that first bit kind of fighting for my health, to be able to get out of bed and walk around. I went from a wheelchair to using a cane, and eventually kind of worked my way to a management place with this illness. And that's 16 years later, and I'm a lawyer and I work in tech. However, health is still pretty much a full-time job for me. I went to 110 doctor's appointments last year and spent $20,000 out of pocket. And I spend a lot of time thinking about how workplaces and how society in general can be more accommodating for people with invisible disabilities or invisible illnesses. One of the things that I think about a lot is how people can't tell. I'm very, what we call able passing, which means that people, when you look at me, I look very healthy, totally normal. And you would never know that most of my time and a lot of my brain space is spent managing a chronic illness.
And let's talk about those statistics. Let's just bust those out right away, because the amount of people who have this, and use those terms again, because I want to make sure people are starting to bring these into their common dialogue. So you said a couple of different things, like the invisible stuff and being abled in a specific way. Do you mind using those terms again?
Sure, no problem. So often people are called either they have invisible illnesses. That's the same thing, very synonymous with something called with chronic illness or chronic illness community. And also the term immunodiverse. So someone can be neurodiverse, meaning their brain functions differently. And then there's immunodiversity, meaning that their body systems function differently. And those all kind of refer to a similar set of folks who manage long-term health issues, like folks who have lupus and MS, Crohn's, colitis, PTSD, mast cell activation, dysautonomia, a whole series of others that maybe you've heard of or that you have not. And interestingly, this group of folks there's over 133 million Americans that manage some sort of chronic health condition, which essentially equals 1 in 5 people have some sort of disability, 20%. Which is wild. And not only is it 20%, but the number is actually growing. So by next year, they think the number 133 is actually going to grow to 157 million people, with 80 million of those folks having multiple different health conditions that they're managing. So not only is this a large portion of the population, but that number is actually growing.
How do we even begin to have a conversation in the workplace to find out if we are accommodating this population like we should. And that to me, Liz, is the CEO of Top Advisor Marketing, I'm terrified of it, right? I'm afraid I'm going to ask the wrong question. I'm afraid I'm going to be not as careful or respectful or utilizing the wrong terminology. But I really think it's wildly important for all companies to make sure that they're making appropriate accommodations, because you can't just write off 20% of the population, right? I mean, and on top of that, now when we had talked previously, you had also said something about worth. So before we jump into the how do you handle this from an HR perspective, do you remember what you were talking about worth and productivity?
Yeah, I think you'd asked what the best piece of advice I'd ever received. And I think that, and I believe this very deeply, this is the one thing I've learned over the 16 years of being very ill, is that my worth and your worth is not dependent on your output. Meaning, like, we have worth just because we are human beings and we are alive, and not for the things that we are producing and not for the things we are doing. And that's tough in capitalism, where people put a lot of premium on your deliverables. But I truly believe, and it's the one thing that I have learned deeply, deeply through this process, is that each human that you interact with, whether it be a client or someone on your team, is worthy of your love and support and respect just because they are alive. They are a human.
Well, let's talk about how we have this conversation now. So people hire you to help have these conversations and to do workplace education, those sorts of things. So if you don't mind, educate us. Let's talk about how us as managers or CEOs or entrepreneurs can have these conversations so that we're being sensitive to it and also being inclusive.
Yeah, awesome. So I speak to often managers and HR departments talking about, I see it as essentially two different things on the internal side of things. You talk about recruitment, how do you get folks in the door? And then you talk about retention, how do you keep and support the folks that you have? And with the number being so large yet so invisible, if you are working even in a team of 4, probably one of you is managing a health condition. And, that could be something like chronic back pain that is, difficult or requires a lot of standing or a different desk setup, or it could be something substantially more complicated, but maybe even more common, like cancer or pregnancy. Those are also like kind of easily understood disabilities. And I think one of the problems, well, there's 2 problems when you're thinking about internally managing folks with disabilities is, one, the narrative is really flat around disability. So a lot of people think, especially illness, that you get sick, you get prescribed some medication, you get better. But for the 20% of the population, the 133 million Americans, that is not the case. It's a much more nuanced, much longer battle. Usually there's some sort of flare cycle where people feel worse and then they feel better and then they feel worse again. But not a lot of people have that kind of mental image. You say cancer and they're like, okay, I know chemo, I know your hair might fall out, there might be a death component, maybe not. But if you say something like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, people don't have any idea what that means, let alone what the experience could be. So part of the problem is we don't really know a lot about it. And that's one of people's fears, when they don't know and they don't understand. And then they really get afraid of both either having the conversation and then trying to do something about it because they don't know what to do. And the other thing that is tough is that the world is really ableist, meaning that we really put a premium on folks who are able-bodied. And you can see this a lot. One of the things we talk about a lot in the disability world is the social model of disability, which is the idea that if we all were wheelchair users, like if every single person in the entire world was in a wheelchair, then the world would just be designed differently. Like the ramps would be different, the countertops would be, like, everything would just be different. And no one would feel disabled because the world would just be designed different. And so when you think about either how you're feeling or how to engage in this conversation, you really want to keep that in mind, that the world is not designed for folks who have disabilities. They might actually be totally fine. Their impairment would be fine if the world was designed differently. It wouldn't be an impairment. It would be totally fine. And so you really want to think about kind of the different structures in your world and in the world that you are working with, either within your client or with your employees, that are making them feel disabled. And that's really what you're solving for, are those pain points.
You even just used some terminology that I don't think the majority of our listeners will be familiar with. And one of them happens to be, a chronic illness, which We're not even really supposed to ask that, though. We're not supposed to walk up to somebody and say, "What's wrong with you?" Right?
Yes,
And
yes.
is that people have that, right? Especially, if you are experiencing a flare up or you're really quite uncomfortable, maybe, you've got something mentally going on, not just physically or both. You can tell when somebody's a little bit out of it. How does one even begin to have the conversation to make it so that accommodations can be given as necessary without, I don't know, prying too deeply? I don't even see. This is
Yes,
the weird
yes,
thing. This is why
yes.
I'm so happy you're here.
Good. I'm so happy I'm here too. So the best way to do this is to put processes into place so that you're not relying just on your own either like emotional response or what you've been taught by society, because we have all been taught to be ableist. And so by putting in systems that you are in place both proactively and that you're managing too, you kind of eliminate a lot of the like emotional turmoil you're talking about. So for example, and I'm going to give you, I think about disability in two ways. One is like the outward facing product. So for example, with your advisors, how are they marketing and making their product accessible to people with disabilities? And then if they work on a team, how are they accommodating their coworkers or their employees? So in both cases, the big thing to do is to be proactive. So make sure that you are, if you're throwing a conference or a dinner for your clients, that you're asking ahead of time about their accommodations. So that means like adding into the RSVP, do you have any food allergies? Do you have any issues with like light or sound that we need to know about? Do you need wheelchair access? Is this the building, telling people whether the building is wheelchair accessible is really useful. But there's all sorts of other things that you might not know about. So one of the resources I can give you is this website called AskJan, JAN.org. And JAN stands for Job Accessibility or Accommodation Network. And it gives you a whole list of accommodations that you can put either on a form so people can check them off, or that you can just simply ask people in an email or via Google form to try to solicit information about what accommodations people need. The key here is to be focusing on the what, not the why. So if someone's like, hey, I really can't be around a lot of overhead lights, that could be for any number of reasons, a traumatic brain injury or PTSD, or maybe they have autism or, any number of things. But the why doesn't really matter as much as the what. And so having some sort of proactive form can really help you get that ahead of time.
AskJan.org. And I want we're going to make sure that that's in the show notes list, but I want everybody to go there to make sure that they have those good questions. And you just said something that really hit home with me, which is to ask what, not why. We are naturally inquisitive, especially in financial services. We're always asking, especially if you do life insurance or insurances, we're asking really personal questions, right? And so I think a lot of people will default to that. They'll kind of go into advisor mode, but that's not appropriate when you're in a workplace situation. Now, that is appropriate if you are actually going through the medical underwriting process and things like that. But let's talk a little bit more about maybe some of the accommodations that you see frequently in office environments that will help people feel like they're being listened to and taken care of. Would you mind helping us with that?
Sure. Yeah, totally. And actually, I'm going to back up really quick and just give you some sentence starters. I feel like some people have so if you do end up in a one-on-one conversation, let's say you're managing an employee, one of the things to do is write all the accommodations that employee needs on what we call a disability passport, essentially like a little plan that has what they need and then action plans and due dates and owners for each of the things. And then you manage to that plan. So it's like essentially like a written agreement. And then you just check in on the agreement to make sure the person still feels supported and if they still need the accommodation or they need it to change. That also sets up a regular cadence and gives you something to talk about rather than about the person. You're talking about the paper, which also helps kind of depersonalize it and de-escalate it a little bit. And then when you're in these conversations, saying things like, hey, I'm curious to know more about that because our experiences are different. Please know that you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. I'm just trying to better understand, or something. If someone says I'm just really tired or I'm having trouble concentrating, you can say something like, well, what is that like for you? I'd love to know exactly what makes you feel tired in this area, in this environment, so that we can help try to remove it or mitigate it. Something I like that I say a lot when I'm in these conversations is I've spent 36 years in my body and it seems to function really differently than yours. So can you slow down and help me understand what you need to do, what help you need to do your best work? Because remember, if people are in pain or they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to be that helpful or that forthcoming or that nice. There's like a really big both like bottom line incentive to help your workers feel the best that they can feel as well. And then you asked me another question and I didn't answer it.
That's no problem. Because thank you for rewinding on that. That was awesome. And that was something that I definitely want. Everybody, the language is so important surrounding this. And if you don't know what to say or even how to begin the conversation, what Liz just gave you is gold, right? That is going to make you do what you should do as a human, not as an entrepreneur or business person or whatever, but just being a human. So my other question was, what are some of the more common accommodations that you have seen, especially for more of the invisible illness sort of stuff? And so let's say they have the disability passport or the conversation has begun. What are some of the common things that you have found that office environments will do for accommodations?
Yeah, I think a big one is flexibility. So especially with all the remote tools, allowing someone to work from home or have a flexible schedule so they can go to doctor's appointments or get their blood draws. A lot of people, a bunch of people need seating near a bathroom, for example, if they've got Crohn's or colitis, but easy access to a single stall can be really important for people. Having a sharps container in your bathroom can be really important. There's a lot of folks who have overstimulation issues for a variety of reasons. And so kind of checking in on noise, lights, smells, all of those can be really important and can be fairly easy fix. So for example, banning very smelly perfumes in the office can often help people. Sometimes synthetic perfumes will trigger migraines or trigger mast cell activation syndrome for some people. So being able to check in on that, and those are fairly easy fixes for a lot of people. I think diet is a really easy one that a lot of people know about already, but rather than asking if someone's gluten-free, there's a lot of people who are on anti-inflammatory diets that might require them to cut out a certain food group that you could just put on the side. So dairy or nightshades but allowing people to have space to write in what they actually need rather than just be like, do you want the gluten-free option, the vegetarian option, or chicken? But allowing people to kind of write in a little bit more specificity what they require. That would go for clients or for employees. So those are some of them. And then Ask Jan is great because if someone's like, hey, I have rheumatoid arthritis, and you're not sure what that means because you don't really have a good narrative, going to Ask Jan, plugging in RA, rheumatoid arthritis, and then you'll see a list of a bunch of the accommodations, and you can actually bring that up and show it to the employee or to the client and be like, do you need any of these? Which ones can I help bring to this space so that you feel more comfortable?
I love that you just split that in between, people who are working with you and then also the clients. So if everybody just, and Liz said 1 out of 4, right? So if you have 4 people in your office, most likely one of them is dealing with something, and it's not black and white. And that's the other thing that you and I talked about previously. This is a spectrum thing, and it's not always consistent. Would you mind talking a little bit about that? Yeah,
sure. So a lot of these illnesses, people like to put an accommodations plan into place and then just leave it. Whoop, we're done, pat themselves on the back, everyone leaves. But a lot of these illnesses are much more complicated. This is the immune system, which we don't understand a lot about, or the gut, which we know very little about, which brain we know even less about. And no one can really tell. So a lot of people have mental health flares. Maybe they manage major depression, but they're not depressed all the time. Usually they go through some sort of flare cycle. And so creating a culture, honestly, if you work in a small team, creating a culture of trust where someone can be like, hey, I'm having a flare. I need to take the following 4 accommodations is, I think, an ideal work situation where people feel like they can actually say that, even though there's stigma, but trying to remove the shame of this in the workplace and remove the shame that people feel on some of these, especially more tricky illnesses, can do a world of good, both for making sure that your employee is doing the best work and that you're supporting them. And of course, there is I don't like to harp on this because I don't think it's the most important piece, but there is a legal duty in a lot of cases to make these accommodations.
Well, you are an attorney.
I am. I am. This is not the law I actually practice, though. So
that's okay.
This is not legal advice, everybody. Not legal advice.
Good disclosure. Good disclosure. I like that.
Thank you.
You'd also said making accommodations, and one of those accommodations can be, changing the physical environment or even allowing them to work from home. And I just want to talk on that for a quick second, because we have more employees at Top Advisor Marketing than a lot of our clients do. And we cover 3 countries and 2 continents. Every single solitary person that we work with works from home, and the concerns of productivity, the concerns of them slacking, the concerns of them not getting their work done, we have not experienced that. Part of that is a cultural thing. Part of that is just an accountability check-in thing. But the other thing is too, we give our team humongous flexibility. If you have something going on, you take care of the something going on. As long as you are able to do what we have asked you to do in a reasonable time frame. And we don't do brain surgery here, Liz, right? I mean, most companies don't. And so people who are so fixated on, well, you've got to get that done in a 40-hour work week, or you have to be here from 8 to 5, or even worse nowadays 7:30 to 6, which is what some people are trying to push. We're, as human beings in general, aren't meant to be sitting down in one place behind a screen for 8 hours a day. That's just bad.
Right.
And then so we're not genetically or even whatever evolutionarily predisposed to do that. On top of that, when you've got people, who have issues doing that, on top of the fact that we're not supposed to do that, now you're just compounding some major stuff. And I'm glad that you just spent a little bit of time talking about the differences between, when things do get bad. As a therapist, I used to do a lot of work with people who suffered from depression, and people have a misconception that if you suffer from depression, you're depressed all the time. That's not the case, right? You can have 8 months of magnificent, regular everyday mood, right? Very consistent mood. And then all of the sudden, right, you can have a massive reduction in the mood elevating, mood management chemicals in your brain, and you can have 3 months of living hell. And people don't really understand that some of this stuff is cyclical. Even when it is chronic, it can still be cyclical. And I'm really, really grateful to you to do that. Now, I think it's very important, because you're doing us a huge favor being on the show in sharing your wisdom with our audience. I would like to be able to return the favor. So if any of our people want to hire you, talk to you, what would you do, and how can our audience engage you to make sure that they're doing this stuff?
Sure. Awesome. Well, the reason I do this is that I really care about building a better world, and I really would love the entire U.S. population to be familiar with the idea of ableism and invisible illness, immunodiversity, to be able to examine their own heart and life and practices and change them. So really what I want help with is to help build an inclusive and accessible future across all sectors. So personally, one of the ways I do that is I speak and I try to teach. So that means I run workshops, I go to people's offices, I'm on conferences, podcasts, trying to get to the TED stage. So but mostly I do this work because I love it. This is actually not my full-time job, but I would love to help anyone. I love to come to your company, train your managers. I'd love to speak at your conference. I'd love to be on your TED stage if you organize a TED. And mostly what I do is I offer support, resources, help people think about accommodations and building a workplace where folks can be included. And then I also and we haven't touched on this yet, so maybe we can, I also help people think about how do you brand and market to this 20% of the population that actually has a disability. And this has been a fairly new piece of it. And actually, maybe I'll just stop there and ask a question about it.
That's fantastic. I just didn't want to get all the way to the end of the podcast without you being able to offer your services. But let's talk about that.
Okay, great.
That's really important to our listeners is multi-generational. Really truly being the family's advisor. And if you're going to be the family's advisor, guaranteed you're going to need to be sensitive to this. So talk about it. Let's go. Let's talk about marketing and branding, and how do you get attention and show that you care?
Yeah, which is great. So I think one of the problems is this segment doesn't, because there's so much stigma and shame and ableism, people don't realize that actually we want to be spoken to and we want to be targeted just like every other group. And I think that one of the best examples of this is Tommy Hilfiger and Target, who have recently launched adaptive clothing lines. So for years, people with physical disabilities have been adapting their own clothing so that they can get in and out of it. So they've added magnets instead of buttons. They've been able to shorten their pant legs for a prosthetic. They have sought out only the softest clothing so that it doesn't, with no tags, so that their overstimulation doesn't get too much. And Tommy Hilfiger and Target recently launched adaptive lines, and it turns out it's almost a $2 billion, or it's over $2 billion, well over $2 billion industry per year. And people just no major clothing company had realized that there was a segment, that there was like this much money in it, and that by creating this clothing, they actually were going to increase market share. So I just like to remind people that this is something that you can use. And part of the way you signal that you are disability friendly and that you understand is by doing some of the proactive stuff. So if you're inviting prospective clients somewhere, that you ask about accommodations, that you have that you make sure your website is accessible, meaning you caption your photos, you correct for color differential so the colorblind can access it. You make sure that you state how accessible your event is if you're having an event or if you're having folks over to your office. And so by signaling these things, it means that, yes, you're talking about it, you're willing to get into it, you're not afraid of the conversation. And some of these illnesses are genetic, and so there is a real serious multi-generational issue that might come up in terms of how much money you're saving and long-term disability insurance and all these things. And we want people to advise us on what to do and how to manage that. And I think by packaging and presenting these as something that you're not afraid to talk about and that you're willing to get into it, I think there's like real market share there too.
When you are communicating this to, maybe I was processing and realized I probably shouldn't have started talking before I asked the question, but whatever. I'm not perfect. So
you can edit it out.
I probably can. I don't think my team will, because they love when I do stuff like this because it doesn't have the. Let's be a little bit more. So put your mind, or put your genius in the brain of a financial services professional, right? So, a lot of them do educational events. A lot of them do. Most of them are doing meetings in their office, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there is there any, like, besides going to askjan.org, what are some of the other things that you can say to broadcast this a little bit more clearly, that you really truly want to make the accommodations and serve this organization? Can I try to force you to be a little bit maybe more specific, or what do you think?
Sure. So you can also go to ada.org, and that's actually ADATA.org, and it is a national network that has information, guidance, and training on the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is like the legal underpinning of this. But in there, there is actually a whole fact sheet and a whole section about how to write and talk about folks with disabilities, and so that's really helpful. And it's also like, for example, if your May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and it is Disabilities Awareness Month, and it is Lyme Awareness Month, and lupus and chronic fatigue and MS. And so May is a big month. So an easy thing you can do, which I've actually heard you recommend before, is highlighting that, acknowledging it, actually saying it, happy National Mental Health Awareness Month. Did you know that one in four people, manage a mental health condition? Mm-hmm. Just even putting that out there and acknowledging it helps people feel seen, and that helps them relate to you more if that is either their situation or the situation of a loved one.
I love that. And in fact, we at Top Advisor Marketing have created an entire calendar that we refer to as just we call them the special days calendar, which we highlight every single solitary month. I think it's 3 to 4 things like that. And some of them are fun, like National Hot Dog Day, but some of them are a lot more serious, like mental health awareness, disability awareness. We do a lot of stuff around, our advisors seem to be wildly patriotic. So there's a lot of stuff about PTSD and veterans and veteran health issues.
Yep.
But if you don't have something like that, it's so easy to find. If you literally Google, what day is today or what days are coming up next week, and you can plan your marketing, or next month or whatever. You can get these great calendars that will talk more about those, and be genuine. Liz, I think we feel that with you, but I want all of our listeners to understand that don't represent that you are an advocate for something that you're really not an advocate for. Now, hopefully through this podcast and through just living life and realizing that, humans are humans, you should be an advocate and you should be more sensitive to this. But if you're not genuine, people are going to sniff you out, right?
Yeah.
You're a schmuck, right? You don't believe this at all. You're just trying to, whatever. And making sure that you are representing yourself with that sort of communication from a marketing perspective is really fantastic. I have a old friend of mine, and she's actually not a current client of our company, but her social media is unbelievable. And one of the reasons why is because she is wildly inclusive, and she is fearless when it comes to this stuff, Liz. And she always wants to make sure that she's posting on social media, about depression, mental illness. I think she just recently did something on Crohn's disease. And it's interesting because she's a very high-end financial advisor, but in her life experience, her clients' kids or her clients have these issues. And she's like, why wouldn't I want to talk about this? These are the people who I serve. And there's a preconceived notion out there that people who have invisible illness or have immunodiversity or any of these chronic illnesses, they don't have investable assets, right?
Right.
We do. And as you said with Hilfiger, right? Or however you pronounce that, that's billions of dollars.
Right.
So, okay. To wrap up today's podcast, I just want to just say one quick thing. If anybody's doing a TED talk and they want to bring in somebody awesome, please reach out to Liz, because I would love to say, for you to call me, 6 months from now and say, hey, I'm on the TED stage, with somebody on the podcast, he gave me a call. So if, I know that there are people out there who are organizing TED. So please, let's give Liz a big thank you and a big gift and get her on that TED stage, because that's our goal. And if we are the kind of people, which we all are, who love to help people achieve their life's goals, then come on, man, just go ahead and give her a shout out, which would lead us to the final question, which is how should people contact you?
Oh, yes. So you can go to my website, LizTravisAllen, ALLEN.com, or you can follow me on Medium, which is where I blog about how workplaces can better accommodate those with invisible disabilities. I both look at what workplaces are doing and I suggest things for the future. And, I think the biggest thing I would say is you don't have to start with me, just start somewhere. Just, ask a question, maybe even survey your clients and your employees to see who is managing a health condition, and just start, take one step in a direction where you both get a little bit more data and you try to make your world and the world around you for others a little bit more accommodating.
Magnificent. Liz, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So if you all have a topic that you would love to have us cover on this podcast, all you have to do is email me at matt@topadvisorm.com, and that M is for marketing. Also, if you have a moment, just give us a quick rating on iTunes. We'd really, really appreciate that, because we love to hear feedback. Hopefully you like what we're doing. And if you do, please subscribe. If you know anybody who needs to have this information that Liz Travis Allen just shared with us, please just click that share button below. That way we can continue to expand people's consciousness and truly understand that 20% of the population is something that we have to pay attention to. And you're a good human. It's the right freaking thing to do. So just freaking do it. Right. That was probably strong, but I didn't swear. So I just want to say that was a little lighter of a freaking there. But anyway, this is wildly important. And as Liz said early on in the podcast, we're at 133 million people right now in the United States. That number is only going up. And so this is a huge aspect of the population that you could very well be the only person who's marketing to, who's accommodating to, who shows that they care, which could be a magnificent opportunity to help people who truly need it with something we all believe in. So for Liz Travis Allen and everybody at Top Advisor Marketing, this is Matt Halloran, and we'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon.
Are you ready to change the way you communicate with your clients? Are you tired of being the best kept secret in your area? Learn how to become a prolific online influencer, attract more ideal clients, and grow your business. Contact us today and see what the power of podcasting can do for your business. Click on the Contact Us link on our website at topadvisormarketing.com and set up a call to learn more. Follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook for more updates and information.
This was brought to you by Iris.xyz, a platform helping financial professionals become better in business and life through new media and new voices. Visit them and learn more at iris.xyz.